The next panel is going to be really excellent. It's one of the big challenges that we have for the ecosystem today. It's about interoperability. So I'd like to welcome Daniela Barbosa and team to the stage. Please welcome them, everybody.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank MAS for hosting us. It's been fantastic 2 days of content and really understanding how blockchain and blockchain-related technologies have really matured over the last few years, and very much so in the last year. I think that a lot of the experiments, for example, that we just went through with Project Guardian is really indicative of the maturation of the market, where the blockchain and distributed ledger market is today. And it's very different than in what it was many years ago. It is multi-chain. I think you've heard over and over again on this stage and on others this week that there are multiple blockchains. There are multiple ledgers, depending on who you're talking to, what language you use. And more importantly, we are seeing real use cases where banks and financial services are using public blockchain, they're using permission blockchain, and they're using hybrids. And this is something that I think is really fascinating and very exciting because this is what we've all been working towards for a long time. I lead the Hyperledger Foundation, which is an open source foundation for blockchain and blockchain-related projects that started the same year, actually, that Singapore FinTech Week has started in 2016. And since then, you see, once again, the maturation markets and the kind of tools that are here. We have a panel of experts, both those that are building and those who have been building for a long time. I'm going to ask to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your firm and what you think about interoperability, and very importantly, what role do you see your firm playing in an interoperability play?
Thanks, Daniela, and hi, everyone. So I'm Tyron. I head up the Onyx Digital Assets platform and also do blockchain work within JP Morgan. For those of you who don't know, Onyx is the blockchain-focused business unit of JP Morgan. And another thing that people don't really realize is how big Onyx is within the bank. We have almost 300 people within Onyx, and that's 300 people exclusively focused on building blockchain solutions and products and infrastructure that not only JP Morgan can use internally and with our clients, but also that we can offer new products to our clients through. And so when we think about, the importance of blockchain technology, we do think about it as, our way of actually contributing to the transformation of the global financial services infrastructure. We definitely see blockchain platforms providing an alternative or a new settlement layer, one that can actually enable, assets to move much more freely than what they do today. And so, when we think about interoperability, as you rightly called out, the number of projects that are now live, and they're no longer projects, they're actually products, has increased quite significantly over the past few years. They are still small in the grand scheme of things. Most of them are, one-off issuances or a small number of transactions that are taking place. However, they are real. And in our case, at least, we have integrated the blockchain platforms that we've built, so Onyx Digital Assets, for example, directly into our banking infrastructure, our markets infrastructure, our risk management systems. And we look at this as another part of the tech stack. So interoperability, as these platforms start to mature and more activity happens over them, obviously we have to think about how we can start to connect them.
Hi everyone, I'm Stéphanie Leheureux. I'm head of Digital Assets Competence Center at Euroclear. So Euroclear is a CSD, a Central Security Depository. It means that we take care of the settlement and the custody of securities between banks. We have today around 40 trillion of USD under custody, and today the transformation and the use of digital assets and what we are talking about tokenization and tokenization of security is really at the heart of what we are exploring and how we can help the market scale, adopt. This is what you were just saying a moment ago, Taran, saying that there are many experimentation and no liquidity for the moment, and this is our role as CSD to help the market adopt and scale. This is what we have been doing for decades now. Another role, which is very important, maybe to explain a little bit about what is a CSD and what we are doing, is providing access. We are global. We have a global activity. We provide access to the different markets for our clients and participants. And I think going back to your question about interoperability would be key to be able to scale, and would be key to be able to access the different liquidity pools when it comes to digital asset securities.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So my name is Simon Baxis. I am the VP of Business Development at Layer Zero Labs as of 6 days ago. So jumping right into the fire, representing us here, 6th day on the job. But previously, I had the privilege of spending 7 years at Google, most notably co-founding our Web3 and digital assets efforts, and leading business development, go-to-market, and partnerships there. And throughout my time at Google, I got to spend quite a bit of time also with the Layer Zero Labs team, slowly but surely falling in love with the problem that we're all here to discuss today, which is infrastructure interoperability in the context of re-architecting the financial system of today. And so for those that don't know, Layer Zero is an omni-chain protocol that enables applications on various blockchains, be that permissioned or permissionless, private or public, to connect and communicate with each other in a secure and seamless way. And so that said, we have majority market share today, serving a variety of use cases across financial services, across DeFi, across gaming, etc. But also are very excited about announcements such as today, made by the Monetary Authority of Singapore in collaboration with Apollo and JPM, facilitating transaction movement and tokenized asset movement between JPM's Onyx digital asset chain and WisdomTree's Avalanche private subnet, and just an entirely new way to think about portfolio management, portfolio rebalancing, et cetera, that I'm sure both Christine and Tyrone here will touch on as we go. But really excited to be here, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, I'm Christine Moy. I'm a partner at Apollo. Apollo is a $500 billion asset manager that focuses on private equity, private credit, and fixed income annuities. And, basically from our perspective, unlike some of the infrastructure providers here, our focus is less on building the core infrastructure in the way that a bank or a CSD would, but actually to be a user of that infrastructure. For all of our strategies, we require access and composition of multiple different asset classes. And to be honest, the way that tokenization of real-world assets has been emerging, there's been a fragmentation across multiple different blockchain protocols, EVM-based or not. There's been, a clear divide between permissioned blockchain and permissionless blockchain. And to be honest, both permissioned and permissionless blockchain have their benefits and they have their use cases. Permissioned blockchains, as an example, have seen a lot of the regulated banks, kind of drawn to that, can enable, privacy across assets, whereas public permissionless blockchains can enable more composability across smart contract libraries and assets and scalability where you don't have to build interoperability with each other, but actually just with the network. And so, I think that as the technology progresses and as blockchain becomes more and more part of the financial markets infrastructure, in the background, by the way, at some point we just stopped talking about blockchain and distributed ledgers, it just starts, like happening in the background, unbeknownst to all of us, like TCP/IP has a number of protocols that work together that no one needs to put a name on, or spend an enormous amount of detail figuring out how it works. So in this evolving world of multiple assets on multiple protocols, both permissioned and permissionless, we at Apollo think that it's really important to acknowledge this multi-chain world and, as a regulated institution, actually help develop it in a way that actually is scalable and usable for participants like ourselves.
All right. And my name is Ben Chan. I'm the VP of Engineering at Chainlink Labs. So Chainlink is the industry standard Web3 services platform. We build data, we build computation, and we build cross-chain services for developers and financial institutions that want to take advantage of blockchain technology and the benefits of that. We've been doing this for about 4 to 5 years, and we've enabled about $9 trillion of transaction value up to date on both public and private networks. And recently we worked together with Swift and 12 other financial institutions to make possible a scalable and secure way to transfer assets across both public and private blockchains. So, I've worked on thousands of integrations with different applications and blockchains over many years, and I wanted to maybe set the stage for why we're in this situation, why we're seeing so many blockchains coming up and getting deployed, and why I think there's going to be an explosion in the number of blockchains in the coming years. And I think it's actually because if you look back at the scalability requirements of a blockchain, the way that the blockchain works is that you get all the transactions, you put them in a block, and then all the nodes and the participants in the blockchain have access to that block. And that makes it very difficult to scale to every single consumer transaction in the world. But what the industry has been doing over the past few years is that they've come up with many cheap and secure ways to allow different organizations to deploy new chains. And so what I think we're going to see is a world where every time an application has a need for lots of transaction volume, and we're seeing this, they're going to stand up a chain. Every time a financial institution has a need for putting an asset on chain, and using that asset, they're going to have a chain for that. And in this world, that's why we're going to have hundreds of thousands of blockchains, and that's why it's really important to talk about interoperability.
Yeah, certainly a multi-chain world for sure. And when it comes with interoperability, there's going to also be many different options and technologies and approaches to doing interoperability. And as more use cases that require assets, for example, moving between a public chain and another public chain or a private and a public, we're going to start seeing different needs. And much like the permissionless and public discussions around which technology do you choose for which purpose you're trying to deliver to your customers and to your market, I think we're going to hear the same thing in regards to some of the interoperability chains. Maybe talk a little bit about some real projects that you've seen and kind of the lessons learned across building things across different networks.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I'll start with is just some projects that don't have any interoperability requirements, at least not now. But the reason why it's important to talk about those is because those are the things that are real, and those are the things that are driving this need for interoperability. So one example is, we have a product within Onyx where we offer our clients the ability to effectively borrow funds intraday on a secured basis using tokenized treasuries as collateral. We're doing about $1 to $2 billion a day of settlement on this platform, and I think to date, since we launched the platform in back end of 2020, we've done about $985 billion. And so this is real money that's being used for real activity using real assets that is now supporting new products that our clients and JP Morgan are actually using every day. We're not the only ones operating at this scale. There are a number of other platforms that do have that scale as well. And actually, we in the report that we just released for the Project Guardian initiative that we did, we actually have a whole page of initiatives that have taken place over the past 5 or 6 years. Different financial institutions, corporates, fintechs, etc., that have actually either issued new assets on blockchains or conducted pilots, or now have live products. And so the reason why we're talking about interoperability, as we said at the start, is because this ecosystem is growing. I think when we think about some of the work that we've done around interoperability, one point that actually came up quite clearly and strongly when we did the project with Apollo was this idea that when we think about traditional financial services, typically you have a custodian or a transfer agent that uses a given ledger as their official books and records. That is where the ownership entitlements of a given asset are held. And in traditional finance, it is unusual for a custodian or a CSD or a transfer agent to have multiple books and records for a given set of assets. There's normally one official books and records. And so when we think about interoperability, one of the things that we think is important to adhere to or to ensure is that assets are not somehow split across multiple ledgers that would become problematic from a legal obligation perspective when you're actually having to record the ownership rights of those assets. And so one of the reasons why we actually ended up leveraging the Layer 0 protocol was because that protocol and some others actually implement a message-based infrastructure where you can pass messages between different networks without actually necessarily transferring the assets across those networks. And so for us, we think this is a model that is important to further explore. Obviously, there are trade-offs either way, but that's at least some of the work that we've done on our side.
So I can maybe give some examples also of why I think interoperability is going to be very key. So we have seen that there is already a lot of different networks. We have network per asset class, per geography, sometimes per institutions, or per use case. So a bond which is issued on a specific platform might be collateralized on another one. You might have the security leg on one platform and a cash leg on another platform. This is especially true when you are talking about the different models that are emerging with CBDC, central bank digital currency. So there are plenty of use cases which explain the theoretical importance of interoperability. And I really concur with what Aaron said in terms of what we could call in my world notarial. How do you make sure that you keep an integrity? So if you have a token which is distributed in another platform and in another platform, how do you make sure that the number of token in circulation is still equal to the total supply at the beginning? You need to have this kind of integrity, and when you are cross networks, that's really something which is complicated and important to be able to do. And then after that, there is technology, but there is as well the legal liability, meaning at some point, if something goes wrong, the owner of the asset will want someone to blame, someone say, okay, what's happened? Where is my token? So the trusted technology is still something which is discutable in my opinion. And then what we are concretely doing, besides exploring the technologies, the different protocol and everything which is concretely happening on the tech side, we have been participating into the Chainlink and Swift experiment in terms of interoperability. And we are building as well our own platform as being interoperable with other DLT platform, but interoperable in a hybrid way, meaning with legacy system or traditional systems. And maybe we will come back after to the reason why we are building it like this, but this is an important part of interoperability. We are talking here a lot about how do we make interoperability between two blockchains or two DLTs, but to make it work at scale, interoperability with legacy system is of critical importance.
Yeah, and I think we'll go back to that point because it's a very important one that people sometimes don't understand. They're just thinking about the interoperability between chains or between networks and not really thinking about the interoperability needed for legacy systems as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to that, and maybe that exact point actually, when we think about interoperability in the context of sort of native Web3, like we've seen a lot of that in DeFi, right? I think like wrapped assets are very common, swaps in DeFi are very common, right? But addressing these type of use cases in in more of an institutional context where you do have legacy systems, where you do have maybe certain requirements where things have to be hosted in the private environment. Maybe it's a private chain. Maybe it's just the infrastructure required to support the cross-chain communication that maybe has to be on-prem or again within the four walls of a certain financial institution, a bank. And I think that's what we're working towards, and that's what's I think really exciting is that now we're starting to see the possibility of connecting these more private permission networks within the four walls of a particular institution to then various public networks or even another entirely different permission and private environment. And I think to Tyrone's point too, there's an interesting distinction there between not just the actual asset movement, but then just the communication itself, right? So there's a difference between messaging and communicating between two different chains, and then actually moving those assets. And so I think that the fact that those possibilities are opening up now is what's really exciting, and I think it just again creates so many use cases, and Project Guardian is just a great example of that.
Yeah, and I wanted to elaborate on Stephanie's point around the importance of thinking about how we integrate legacy systems with new blockchain systems. I mean, Tyrone knows when we wrote our paper for the Project Guardian this year, that was like a really key point for us, that not only were we going to connect different blockchains, that we would elaborate on how we connect to legacy systems. And through the years, we've already been able to demonstrate this. And so in our paper, we actually talk about the difference between asset-backed tokenization and native tokenization. And that in itself becomes a bridge where in asset-backed tokenization, if you've been following the space, this is where you essentially immobilize I guess you would call it like a real-world legacy asset in a traditional system, like in custody, as an example, and then create a digital twin on a blockchain to represent ownership or basically point to that asset that is in traditional custody. So the project that Tyrone mentioned that we launched together a few years ago, tokenizing over almost $1 trillion of treasuries, like the Treasury, we didn't have to convince the Fed and the Treasury to tokenize treasuries. Like basically the treasuries were immobilized in the Bank of New York Mellon tri-party collateral account. And that's actually a really scalable way to get a number of real-world assets on chain. I mean, in my opinion, single issuance of assets, item by item, is never going to scale. So, I think that the aggregation points of assets, whether they be in custodians, tri-party, fund admins, basically the master multi-asset registries, are really in the plum position to essentially drive tokenization of these assets. So anyway, that's asset-backed tokenization. And then on the other side, you have native asset tokenization, which is there is not a record that exists off-chain, basically the ownership record is natively on-chain. But the cool thing is that if these assets all share in the same tech standard, so let's call it a token standard, then they can interact with each other seamlessly, and this is what we demonstrated in our project with JP Morgan around rebalancing multiple different types of assets. Where you share a tokenization standard, then it actually doesn't matter if you're trapped in a legacy system or if you're a newborn native digital issuance, because at the end of the day, you share the same protocols of how value is transferred and how you interact with each other. That's super powerful, and people need to recognize that there are multiple ways to put assets on chain. And bridging with legacy systems is most important. The other thing that I want to mention, and this is kind of like a spicy take here, is that I know that we're all super nerds here and really into talking about technological interoperability between blockchain networks, but actually for a lot of use cases, you don't actually need to have interactions between the blockchain networks, right? I mean, wrapping assets is one occasion, and certainly there are use cases for it. But sometimes it's okay for the assets to just live on different chains as long as you're connected to all the different chains. So, for example, Apollo has a strategic tokenization collaborator named Oasis Pro, and Oasis Pro is connected to 14 different blockchain networks. Now, and as a result, like where we tokenize, we can tokenize on any of those blockchain networks. And where we create portfolio strategies, we can have access to assets across all of those networks. Now, does Oasis Pro need to create connectivity between like the actual blockchains themselves? Not for like a basic level portfolio management or at least a portfolio reporting use case, as an example. Rebalancing is another more complicated use case, which is why we had interoperability in our project with JP Morgan. So, I just wanted to like elaborate that yes, we are all super nerds, but like in reality, there's always going to be a combination of solutions, and sometimes the most high-tech solution is not necessarily the one that you need.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. I think that standards are the most important thing that we have to agree on when it comes to connecting chains together with interoperability. I feel that if you look at where we are right now in the development phases of financial institutions onboarding blockchain, they are still in the initial integration stage, in the onboarding stage. They've gotten past the research phase. But what that means is that for us, actually, what we are seeing and what we've learned through our integration with Swift and 12 financial institutions and Euroclear with Stephanie is that what's important is to lower the onboarding complexity and the amount of friction that it takes for an institution to onboard onto a standard or onto a chain. And so what we built at Chainlink Labs was we tried to create, and we created an enterprise abstraction layer. And what that does is it takes all the complexity of a blockchain, so everything from how you sign a transaction and how you transmit that and how you make sure it's confirmed to how you get the balances and index the chain. And we package it in such a way that the existing infrastructure at those institutions can actually be used. So in the Swift example, what we tried to do was to demonstrate that we could use a Swift message with a Swift signature, of which the institutions already are utilizing today, and they are already signing those messages today, so that they don't really need to make significant changes to their infrastructure or process to basically be able to do these cross-chain blockchain interactions.
I might front run some of your questions here, but I'm going to jump in as well. So when we think about interoperability, I mean, really what we're talking about is language, right? I mean, and Christine sort of started touching on it a little bit. In anything in life, whether it's going to another country or integrating into a new system, what you're trying to do is bridge between what you know and what the other people know, or the language that you speak. And something that people don't really talk about very much is that by default, the traditional financial services system is not interoperable. I mean, there is no ways that JP Morgan systems know how to connect to Goldman Sachs' internal systems. Right? We are completely not interoperable. The language of financial services is Swift. Right? That is how financial services communicate with each other, and that is how you have a global financial infrastructure that can actually transact, between competitors, between peers, across borders, etc. And I think one thing that we have not yet got to in the blockchain space is what that language is, what that standard is, and that's going to be a multi-tiered thing. One part of it will be messaging standards. How do you actually communicate data between platforms? Another is going to be representing that data or representing assets in token standard form. And then there's going to be standards around legals and regulatory requirements, etc. So we're really, really early in solving any of these problems, truthfully. But I think that's okay for now, because it's also important that we don't try and build bridges to networks that may not actually be there in 2 to 5 years. And as a commercial entity, you have to place bets, you have to prioritize work, and that is going to be driven by what the commercial value is. And the last thing I just want to sort of say, like a completely random point, but I think it's also worth just calling out, which is the reason why interoperability is such a big topic in blockchain as opposed to something like the internet is because blockchains by default are these commercial platforms, right? Inherently within public blockchain domains, you have a token. People are incentivized to use a given platform to increase the activity on a platform, and they are disincentivized to move away from that platform. And so unlike the internet, where we do have these very, very elegant standards that allow for information to exchange very easily, that is largely driven by the fact that when the internet was created, it was a research project that was purely there for enabling information to flow more easily. That is not the genesis of blockchain protocols. And so part of the reason why people care so much about a given platform or interoperability to others is to ensure that they are either not being locked in or their reason for being there is not being diluted in some sense. So it's a complex problem to solve for, and obviously we're all here to try and do that.
Sorry, we're all trying to jump in.
Oh.
I thought. Okay, so to come back to the why, and maybe we can rewind a little bit of why we are doing that. And I'm not talking about the native token, cryptocurrency, etc., but more in the capital markets and for traditional securities, which is where we operate as a CSD. And it has been years and years and billions of investment to connect all the markets. So we are talking here about technical interoperability, but what are we trying to achieve and why are we doing that? It is to provide access to market. It is to facilitate the onboarding and any investor in one market can access any kind of security across the world. So this is something which is working today, and we can bring some efficiency, and this is for me what blockchain and technology can bring. So it's not okay for an investor to have to connect to each market individually. This is something which is not working in the traditional world and probably will not work in terms of blockchain. So that's another reason why you will need this kind of interoperability, the ability to make the token circulate and bring some efficiencies. But again, I want to come back to the value of why we are doing this transformation of capital market, what kind of efficiencies we want to bring to the world, because today, there are some inefficiencies, there are some breaks due to the capital, to the market structures, but the use of blockchain needs to bring value and worth the transformation and the heavy investment it's going to bring to the market. And this is something that sometimes is missing into all the discussion to give this kind of perspective and what are we trying to achieve. And in terms of one of the big benefits for blockchain will be the data distribution in real time, moving away from a kind of sequential value chain into something which is more circular. But to be able to do that, people have to be connected and systems have to interoperate. And you're absolutely right about SWIFT being the standard. I think it's a little bit early to talk about standard when we are in the blockchain world, and there are many of them. SWIFT will probably help bring an answer on that. They have been there for decades, and a lot of the insight and intel and the work which has been done collaboratively with the market, because it's a user-owned entity, can be used when it comes to standard for blockchain.
And before we go, I just want to tell the audience we will break for questions at the end, so get them started. Go ahead, Sid.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the standard point, and not to do your job for you, Daniela, but maybe a question for Tyrone. Like, who do you think is the most appropriate entity to set those standards, right? I think like a lot of people have tried, especially in the crypto space, we haven't really seen mass adoption of standards. You think about, maybe the advertising world or just the internet world in general. You think the W3C, you think organizations participating there. I'm just curious, like, maybe for everyone actually, like, who do you think should set those standards?
I mean, I think that the W3C is a natural place for this. Only because they are an open standards body and they define, how different organizations can connect over protocols. SWIFT would be a natural starting place as well. I think where SWIFT may be, obviously very, very specific to financial services, there are many, many different blockchain use cases that don't necessarily require, a SWIFT kind of message. So actually forcing that in might be problematic over time.
And probably it's different between the content and the message and the protocol which is used to do the interoperability. Web3 could, or the standard could be the type of protocol which is used, and then the content instead of the message, which is really also the standard, SWIFT standard when it comes to financial market, is something a little bit different and complementary.
Okay, well, I don't want to be like the super hypey person that wants to combine like multiple buzzwords in one sentence and say blockchain and AI are going to have a convergence, but I will. So, I mean, in this most recent generation of AI, generative AI, we've seen that it's actually quite good at translating between languages. So most popular uses are translating from one human language to another human language, English to French as an example. But we've also seen that it's quite good at translating between human language and machine language, writing code, and then we've actually seen it be really good at translating between machine language to machine language. So translating COBOL code into new JavaScript or Python code as an example, right? And so, spicy take, again, I'm just, thinking out loud here, but, in the world that we live in, yes, we care about standards. I just talked about token standards being important, but maybe the world that we will live in the future, doesn't require that much standardization, or at least essential standardization, because maybe we can throw some generative AI on that and actually have AI translate between Swift messages and token standards, blockchain protocols to blockchain protocols. I mean, yes, I'm going to be that hypey person to say there's a convergence between blockchain and AI.
I would be disappointed if the head of digital assets and AI didn't bring up.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to pump that. But, I really do think that AI does open up incredible opportunities for blockchain at large. First of all, the fact that for every given blockchain protocol you need to learn a new language, I mean, I appreciate all the devs here, but there aren't enough of you, right? But now with generative AI, you actually can start writing smart contract code quite easily, even if you haven't actually spent a lot of time in that code. So, for example, Aptos, which is a portfolio company of Apollo, has partnered with Microsoft, and this is specifically what they're using AI to do to basically help move smart contract code easily for those that haven't actually learned Move smart contract code, or for those that only know Solidity, Ethereum code as an example. Additionally, sorry, now we're just going totally off track. Additionally, AI is kind of evolving into this world of AI agents, so moving beyond I'll just talk to you, but rather I'll just do things for you, and actually a construct of quarterback AI with a number of micro little AI bots that are very specialized in a particular domain, and the quarterback AI essentially putting together a work plan to say, okay, all you little AIs AI bots, please do all this stuff for me. I mean, that essentially, delegating that work actually becomes ends up creating a bot supply chain. And how are bots going to pay each other? They're not going to send Swift messages or send wires to each other. They're going to be micropayments. So that's going to be digital assets as well, and blockchain-based payments. So
connecting the dots, exchanging value, bridging ecosystems with AI.
Yeah, exactly. And blockchain, obviously.
I think Tyron said this before, is that in 2 years' time and 5 years' time, it's going to look very different. And so you're right, we shouldn't rush to standards. We should leave optionality out there and then throw some AI robots at it.
Well, I mean, the thing to actually to think about it is that if you actually think about AI, they are the most incentivized entity around to come up with these standards, because the blockchain ecosystem is the only ecosystem in which an AI can actually own, at a first principles level, their keys and their property. And so if there's a situation where these bots are going to be earning funds and they're going to be talking to other bots about doing a job and trading, they can actually do that directly on the chain. And they can do that as their own entity, and that's something that hasn't been possible before for AI. So I think the AIs should really get on this if they're listening.
Yeah. So I'll ask one last question before we open up to the audience. Is very specifically about security and integrity. This is something that companies and organizations ask all the time when it comes to interoperability and doing transactions between networks. So Simon, maybe you can take that one, because I do think it's something that needs to be, the standards would apply to it, but that you also need to be able to get in that framework, that legal framework that we talked about before, to get through compliance, to get these things into production. So.
Yeah, that's certainly important, and I think when talking about security and integrity in general, we at Layer Zero, but I think in more broadly, think about three principles, right? One is immutability, meaning that no one, including ourselves, should be able to change or alter contracts that are written and deployed. Two is permissionless decentralization. And that can mean many things, but I think at the core of it, it should mean that there shouldn't be a single point of failure or a single surface of attack for infrastructure in the interoperability layer. And then three is censorship resistance, right, which means that no one should be able to shut down the critical infrastructure that exists. Frankly, even if our entire team disappeared, like the protocol should still operate and the infrastructure should still live and provide the value that it does. And so like when I think about sort of the security aspect, like I like to use this analogy for Layer Zero in particular, thinking about it as a fleet of cars, right? And so if you have a very important passenger, a very important asset that you need to move from point A to point B, we'll give you a armored car, right? Meaning that you can run the infrastructure in your own environment, be it a private environment, et cetera. If you want maybe a bit more decentralization, but you still want to trust some sort of entity, we'll give you a cab, right? Which means that you can use a trusted third party that runs infrastructure within the Layer Zero ecosystem, like Google, for example, that you rely on for the cross-chain messaging and interoperability. And if you want to go full decentralized, full permissionless, right, we'll give you an Uber, meaning that you'll be able to use a variety of third-party providers within the Layer Zero ecosystem to trust basically the cross-chain messaging. And so I think the point behind that analogy and kind of explaining that whether Layer Zero or not, I think when it comes to security, we want to provide optionality and the ability to actually set the level of security that you want, putting the application developer, owner, whatever, in full control of what that security really looks like. And that should ensure integrity rather than trusting a single party that is us or someone else.
I know we're almost at time, but I just wanted to quickly add on to this point, which is, something we haven't spoken about is what it actually takes to implement this kind of technology in a regulated financial services company. And, some of the things that we constantly get challenged internally and also by regulators is what is the control environment? How do you guarantee that, everything is secure, everything is actually protected? And do I need to guarantee that the other bridges or the other communication protocols that might be connected to some chain that I am connecting to is equally secure, right? And so this is something that is frankly another open question. How do you get internal cyber teams, security teams comfortable with this infrastructure? And this is not just interoperability solutions, this is blockchain generally. But then also how do you explain to regulators and get them comfortable with this paradigm? Like, this is not something that they are used to trafficking in. So we definitely have some challenges for sure.
So
There's no playbook. You guys are writing it.
I actually think there is a playbook to some extent. So if you think about security in general, there are many operating controls today that traditional financial institutions already use. So one of the important ones I think we looked at was that of the duality principle. So every single transaction that gets sent between a message or an asset between one chain and another needs to have a maker and a checker. Or basically in our world we have a DON, a decentralized Oracle network, which has a proposer, and then we have a separate DON, and this has to be a distinct role, right? The approver role can't also be a role that can create a transaction. And so that's one of the kind of operating controls that I think already exists today as somewhat of a requirement that we should also adopt, right? And then we can also take the other decentralization principles on top, like running more than one node in each group of that distinct role, making sure we don't have a single point of failure. So what we did, which I think was really cool, is that we actually have two separate groups. One of them is the proposer and the other one is the approver. And for each group, we minimize the single point of failure by having two different teams implemented in two different languages. So even if there were a bug in the Golang language, which is by Google, in one of those implementations, then you would have this secure approver that would detect any fraudulent transaction there.
I think this is a really important point, actually, because I know we're out of time almost. There are lots of controls today. The challenge actually is that blockchain is this very heavily loaded word, right? And as soon as you say the word blockchain, all of a sudden people think they have to do 10x the amount of scrutiny or scrutinize whatever you're doing. And so I think a body of work that should be done is actually mapping, here's what we do today, and here's why it is no different when we actually implement these new technologies.
I mean, I think we should just stop using the word blockchain. Honestly, if you guys, whoever is building blockchain solutions, if you just showed up to someone and said, hey, I've got a multi-party shared ledger where everything is automated and it works and it solves your business problem, who's going to have a problem with that? No one. So that's what we should be saying, as opposed to causing all sorts of complications like, oh, this is like blockchain and digital assets. What's that? Sounds like crypto and it's scary. Let's not do that. Or let's have 10 people check it before we even figure out what it is that we're trying to do and the problem we're trying to solve in the first place. So I think the industry needs to evolve its language. Blockchain, tokenization, obviously I'm the queen of blockchain over here, but for years. But honestly, if we really want to move this forward, just focus on the business problem that you're solving. Don't talk about the technology. No one knows how their Oracle database works, and no one cares.
If you allow me just one more, and I couldn't agree more with the fact that let's talk about business value and let's talk about that, but just a quick story, real story to finish. So we have just launched a digital asset or digital bond issuance platform, and we are doing traditional issuance with thousands per day, every day. And suddenly, when we are talking about that in the context of blockchain, everybody's, okay, can I see the technology? Where is the smart contract? How did it happen? What's happening? And nobody's asking in mainframe. So that's absolutely true. It's blockchain. So we are talking and discussing about things we shouldn't care about. We should talk about the value, what we are bringing to the market, and why we are doing all that and working on that. What kind of value we can unlock for the market.
I'm going to change my title to head of software and AI at Apollo.
Databases.
Databases, yeah, that's a good one.
I will add AI in my
technology. A taxonomy for the industry is needed across the board. I want to thank the panelists. I apologize that we didn't have time to have questions. The panelists will stick around if you have questions for them. Perhaps they'll answer them offline as well. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm sure we'll be back next year with a deeper dive on what actually is happening in the interoperability space. Thank you.